Hello, you're watching TVP World Talks. I'm Jonasz Rewiński. EU foreign ministers are scheduled to meet on Tuesday. Both Ukraine and other global flashpoints, most notably Iran, high on the agenda. But will this session of the Foreign Affairs Council be overshadowed by Hungary's likely attempt to block the 20th sanctions package of the European Union against Russia due to the row of a Russian oil pipeline failure? Joining us here today is Roland Freudenstein, co-founder of the Brussels Freedom Hub. Hello and welcome to TVP World.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
So let's begin with the negotiations between Ukraine and Russia. What leverage does the EU have here? Because the EU often says we are paying for helping Ukraine out in this war, we should be included. The US administration obviously has other ideas. Can the European Union actually change the dynamics of these talks at this stage?
By acting, yes, by helping Ukraine to win. And actually, right at the moment, it doesn't look that bad anymore. If you look at the news from the front line. But no, the fact of the matter is that as to the EU's role in negotiations, well, it's ultimately for Russia and the US to decide that. And as long as they want to negotiate without the European Union, even Ukraine arguing that the EU should be at the table, I'm afraid won't help. So
how did we arrive at this stage? I mean, Europe is a major stakeholder. The war is happening in Europe, and right now, Europe is actually footing the bill. So the argument goes, well, we definitely should be at the table. How did it happen that we're not?
Because the US started the push for the peace negotiations last year, as we all remember. And they did it first by talking bilaterally to the Russians. And now the technical negotiations are going on between Russia and Ukraine, but we all know that they're not even close to any kind of agreement. Well, you know, it's up to the negotiating parties to say, well, we're not negotiating unless the Europeans participate. But it's not happening. So Europe, the best thing Europe can do is, well, continue, of course, to argue that we should be at the table, but we have to live with the fact that for the moment we aren't. And therefore, we've got to do the maximum to help Ukraine improve its position.
Kaja Kallas says we need to apply more pressure on Russia. What tools do we have? How much can we do, for example, with the 20th sanctions package?
Well, the 20th sanctions package is significant, especially in regards to the so-called shadow fleet. These are vessels under different flags, but transporting Russian oil. Often having technical problems, certainly difficulties to get proper insurance and so on. And this 20th sanctions package, for example, would make it impossible for these ships to get proper service and maintenance in any port in the European Union. And that, for example, it would be something that makes it even more difficult for Russia to sell its fossil energy worldwide. So that is why exactly Hungary and Slovakia are so opposed to this now, you know, pretty much upon the request from Moscow, as we can presume.
So what can the European Union do to overcome this opposition? Right now, Hungary and Slovakia are citing the problem with the pipeline, which, according to the Ukrainians, was actually damaged by a Russian strike. So it's a bit of a catch-22 situation. Is Ukraine supposed to repair Russia's property in order to facilitate, negotiations here? Or should the EU actually use some of its tools and apply more pressure on Slovakia and Hungary to essentially prevent them from blocking this important initiative?
Well, it's going to be maybe a combination of both, but the fact is that probably no compromise, no consensus between the other member states and Slovakia and Hungary will be found until tomorrow, when we have the 4-year anniversary of the full-scale invasion of Russia in Ukraine. So actually, the sad fact for the moment is, first of all, that Ursula von der Leyen and Antonio Costa, the Council President and the Commission President, will go to Kiev with empty hands, so to speak, which is going to be symbolically bad. But I think we can be pretty sure that a solution will be found in the days after that. The question is what it will look like, whether Ukraine maybe speeds up repairing the Druzhba pipeline, whether there is indeed more pressure by the other member states on Hungary and Slovakia. We don't know yet. This we'll figure out over the next couple of days.
Do you think a more decisive stance would actually allow Europe to come back to this stage? So the US, looking at the European Union reinvigorated with new initiatives in helping Ukraine, would they say, okay, so we have no choice but to accept that Europe is a stakeholder and a major player here? Wouldn't you say that it's partially within, the grasp of the European Union? If they take the initiative back, they can actually present an argument to the US which will be difficult to refuse.
Honestly, I mean, we're coming back to this question of Europe sitting at the table. I really don't think what the European Union now sitting at the table would say different from what Ukraine is saying. The Ukrainians are very much taking care of their own security, and they don't want to withdraw from territory that the Russians haven't occupied yet. They want rock-hard security guarantees. So, what else could the European Union contribute that Ukraine is not contributing to the negotiations?
Well, security guarantees from the European Union reinforce Ukrainian negotiating position. If there was a specific timeline, what sort of forces we could contribute, for example?
Well, we have British and French commitments to put troops on the ground. And where the number is varying between 10 and 15,000, I think, at the moment. I mean, these are commitments that are being made in order for the negotiations to move forward. But Europe doesn't have to be at the table. It doesn't have to waste energy in trying to persuade the United States and Russia to let Europe participate. So, as you see, I'm a bit skeptical about wasting energy on this pure symbolic thing of Europe being at the table, while Ukraine can very much take care of itself. And the European Union is supporting Ukraine and is supporting Ukraine also talking to the Americans. So I really fail to see what would strategically improve if the European Union is formally in these negotiations. But you're right that the security guarantees are a key, if not the key aspect of a future ceasefire and then hopefully peace agreement between Russia and Ukraine.
So a quick question regarding Iran. The European Union is saying that diplomacy must prevail, but isn't it in a slightly weaker position here, not being a stakeholder? And also, would it really be that much of a problem for the European Union if there was a confrontation? Apart from the obvious instability, would the European Union not be at least slightly satisfied if the regime started to wobble or was completely removed by the US one way or another? Do you think that these protests are more of a decorative kind of thing, a ritual, than in the case of the Ukraine negotiations, where they are much more substantive?
I believe the European Union is opposed to the regime in Tehran, like any democrat in this world is opposed to the regime. The question is, will we get an improvement in Middle Eastern security after the regime is toppled? So everything has to be in place to ensure that there is some kind of follow-up plan, that there is that we know we have a fair idea that there's not going to be a civil war in Iran or a wider conflict enveloping the whole region. But in itself, to my mind, removing the regime, helping the Iranian people to finally determine their own future and their political system would be actually a good thing. And that should be the official position of the EU.
Roland Freudenstein was our guest today here on TVP World. Thank you very much for joining us and for sharing your insight.
Thank you.
And I'm Jonasz. You're watching TVP World. Stay with us for more latest news, updates and commentary.